Hey teachers, this is the Utah State Board of Education testing ethics policy training for 2020 to 2021. I'm going to try and go through this as quick as possible so that you guys get the information you need and you're ready to teach your students about testing and then testing them during the RISE and other assessments. First of all, we're going to be addressing when you test, the purpose, statewide assessments, formative tools, teaching practices during test, after test, unethical testing practices, and violations and how those are handled. All right, I like this. The purpose of testing. Well, when administered properly, it allows you to know what a student knows. Okay, what does administered properly mean? Well, this next slide is the one that I think is the most important because it covers everything we really need to know. And unethical testing practices. We want to know what the students know and can do. If your actions will cause students to not receive a valid, reliable score that accurately reflects what they know and can do, don't do it. That really is the bottom line of this whole presentation. Okay, we want to know what the kids know, and if any of your actions alter their thinking or what they would have chosen on a test during a summative assessment, then it's unethical. That is the bottom line. Okay. All right, statewide assessments are required. We have to do them. You're also required every year to take the ethics training, which is what you're doing right now. They're federally mandated, state mandated, and required. That's all this says. These are examples of district mandated that you are supposed to take this ethics for. A lot of people think it's only for RISE, but you can see all these other tests are ones that are required under the ethics policy that you receive this training. These are examples of ones that are not required for the ethics training, but that you also can use for formative tools or productivity. All right, before testing, first teach your students. Teach them the curriculum, the Common Core. Use a lot of different methods, use formative instruction. This pretty much is what you've been doing all year. You don't need me to explain it, but you get it. Also address accommodations with students throughout the year with their 504s, IEPs, and this maybe ELL is what they meant by that. I'm not 100% sure. All right. Um, all assessments are supposed to be proctored by a licensed educator. This is one that we forget. Teachers, if you have to leave the room during a formative assessment, there should be a licensed educator in that room with them. You should never leave them alone, and you cannot leave them alone with your TA. So please keep that in mind during RISE testing or these other assessments that I showed you. Um, you guys are all required to take this. That's what you're doing right now. I already explained that. During the summative assessment, there is a script. The script must be followed exactly. You must read. These are called TAMs or test administration manuals. So if you ever hear us talk about a TAM, that means there is a required word for word speech that you are not to vary from during the test. Okay. Next, all students that you are testing need to be accounted for. In other words, you test them, and when they're finished, they need to be marked. Usually we have a process for this in the computer lab where whoever's proctoring them or whoever's in the lab is going to keep track, but you yourself also must make sure that you double check that the students, every one of your students who is required to take the test does take that test. Okay, here's your job as a teacher, as a licensed educator, this during the test. An appropriate environment is set for testing to limit distractions. Close your door. Don't have anything that would distract the students, tell the kids not to distract each others. Students cannot be discouraged from participating in the test. Don't tell them that they shouldn't do it. Try not to be negative right before or cause them to be anxious. Students aren't penalized who have been exempt from the test. So make sure you don't talk down to a kid whose parents have exempted him. Treat him just like you would everyone else. Um, Please do not give them a non-academic reward for participating. So you can't say, I will give you this if you take the test. Students need to be provided an alternate activity if they're exempt. If they're exempt from the test, you can't just say, here's a piece of paper, draw the whole time. They need to be involved in learning process. Whether that means put them in a class that's teaching, that's great. Give them an assignment or let them work on a project that's already being done. But don't let them just sit and read. Don't let them just sit and draw because that is against the rules. All right. Students that have been exempt may be allowed to be physically present in the room during test administration. This is new. I did not know that. So students who do not take the test or exempt can be in there, but they also need to understand that they are not allowed to look at the questions, talk about the questions, etc. I do recommend that at Azar School, I would rather have them in another classroom because that's going to be a less distraction. So, but it is possible if there is no other place. We have to have a proctor present. Remember, we talked about that. It's got to be a licensed educator. We're going to make sure you review everything before you go in so you know what's going on. You have the TAMs. We're going to have them in there for you. So don't stress about that. We'll have them ready for you. Ensure that accommodations for your students are covered. Well, truth is, if they have an IEP or a 504, we are going to pull them or put them in a group. Otherwise, the test itself does have the accommodations. So this isn't really a big worry. Your goal, though, is to make sure that you're not taking in one of those students without talking to SPED. So if you have a student you know SPED, make sure and double check with Bryson or a SPED person and see if they need accommodations or if they're good in the big group. Otherwise, I think they'll be taking them and testing them separately. Electronic devices, please don't let students take these in with you. Smartwatches, cell phones cannot be used during the test. Anything that will give them an unfair advantage, not allowed. This is very important. The only reason you would is if it's necessary for the health. Like a student with diabetes has their pump, of course you're going to let them in. Okay? Makeup and test completion sessions are provided for students according to the policies and procedures. These students during these sessions are allowed to pause the test, go get a drink, use the restroom. There's not a limit to how many times they can do that, but you know them as students and you know whether they're taking advantage. They're going to have to take the test until they're completed, so it may take them many sessions, and we'll go with that later. Okay. After testing, everything that they use, like scratch paper, notes, student tickets, everything has to be collected. They are not allowed to take stuff out. Please stress this before they get into testing. A lot of students love to use their scratch paper for drawing and do something amazing, and then they try and convince you afterwards and say, hey, but I just did this amazing drawing. There's no notes on it. Can I please keep it? Make sure they know beforehand that they cannot. Okay. Everything needs to be returned to the test coordinator as outlined in the TAMs. Remember the test administration manuals. What kind of scratch papers can they use? They can use line paper, they can use graph paper, but you cannot bring any sort of paper, can't take any type of paper that already has like a map. You know, like thinking maps, they're great. You just can't pre-create those. You can teach your student that they can draw those on their scratch paper, but they're not allowed to take those in there with them. Okay, so lined paper, blank paper, graph paper. Those three are okay to use. All right. Make sure that you don't discuss the questions after. You cannot specifically talk about any specific questions. Also, the scores, okay, they are used to talk about the student, and you can use them to improve the student's grade. Okay, kind of interesting. After the test, you see your student did amazing, they're not doing well in class. You can use their end assessment to increase their grade. You cannot prohibit a student from enrolling in honors the test itself can't be used to hold the student back. Okay, or a student that's exempt can't use that as well to hold a student back. So this test itself cannot be used to hold a student back. It can be used on their grade to improve their grade. Notice they don't say decrease their grade, only improve their grade. If you want more information, here's the state codes. Feel free to get to those. I'll send the PowerPoint as well with this. All right. You also can use student scores from a statewide assessment to improve students' Didn't I just say this? All right. It's pretty much repeating the same thing. Don't give them a non-academic reward. So you really, during this test, you're not allowed to give them, say, if you do amazing, I'll buy you a popsicle or anything. Cannot have any motivation that is a reward like that. All right. Unethical testing practices. Be cautious. If you end up doing something unethical during a test practice, such as guiding students to a question. Say they're really close to the right answer and then they start moving to the wrong and you go, that would be considered unethical. If you just point at the screen and tell the student which ones they should not choose, that would be very unethical. It is okay for you to help the student. This is a general rule. You can help the student with anything, any of the tools on the screen, but not in selecting the correct answer. For example, if they ask you and say, how do I use the highlighter? You can totally show them how to use the highlighter on the screen. But if they say, I don't understand this word, you can't read the word for them, you can't describe the word, you cannot give them the definition, because that would be guiding them to the answer, and this is to see what they already know. I hope that makes sense. That is kind of a big deal. Protocol. Luckily, this does not happen very often. I have heard of it one time in one of the schools I worked, and the teacher ended up getting fired. But be careful. If you get caught, it is a big deal. If there's a suspected violation, for some reason you choose to violate an unethical plan of to get your kids doing amazing even though they're not. Um, there's a suspicion, we do an investigation, the principal and vice principal and whoever else, director, will decide a consequence or send it to UPAC and consequence, which ultimately is the State Board of Education. There you go. UPAC, so it goes to the State Board of Education, Utah Professional Practices Advisory Commission. Just be warned, don't do it, not worth it. Teach your best, let the kids do their best, and things will all be great. All right, the last page is just resources. If you need to see any of the laws, if you would like to review any of that, you're totally welcome to. But this is the ethics training. Again, it all comes back to that very first couple slides, this one. If your actions will cause students to not receive a valid and reliable score that accurately reflects what they know and can do, don't do it. That is the bottom line of this. I hope you enjoyed this quick presentation. Please stop this, research any other information, ask questions if you need, and then sign the paper and return it to Mr. Hall in the office. Thank you so much for your time, and under 12 minutes. Goodbye.